Beautiful.
I've been in Maine for 52 years and did a bunch of stuff. I'm a weaver. That's why I was put on this planet, was to be a weaver. And figured that's what I'd be doing the rest of my life, and I'm still doing it. As you can see, the loom behind me. But I'm a gay man, and realizing when I moved to Maine that rural Maine was probably not going to be the friendliest place in the world. So I've chosen right off the bat to sort of keep myself separate from the rest of the community, thinking just about out of pure safety. I've always been kind of a shy guy anyway, so that was easy. But I remember very clearly the first time I read about HIV. I can still see it. I can still see in the Advocate, which is a national gay and lesbian magazine in the 80s, this little blurb at the bottom talking about that. And after living in New York for 4 years and doing a whole lot of drug, sex, and alcohol, I realized their description was me when I lived in New York. That was 15 years before that, but it was still me. And I knew someday it would be here in Maine because stuff like that does that. So I guess it was probably in the mid to late 80s I first, the gay community, thank goodness, from the very beginning around HIV, passed legislation protecting people with HIV in the state of Maine long before the first case was diagnosed. They got that done early on, which was a great thing. And then in the mid 80s, I guess it was, organizing started happening, and there was, finally some new cases. And so I knew it was going to be in my community. So I figured I needed to do something, got me off my ass to try to do something. And so I contacted, along with me and another gay man who had lived in New York in the early 80s. And I can't describe him other than shell shocked after living in the horror of early HIV in New York. He came back to Maine. He was born and raised in Maine. And we talked about what we could do. And so we started putting on parties, where we could gather together all the gay men we could think of and not. And we thought that would be a place where we could at least start a conversation, put out brochures, go to the health department to get condoms, whatever we wanted to do. And what was fascinating about that, the first couple parties, of course, Saturday night at Ron's house, let's drug, sex, and rock and roll. Of course, a bunch of gay men. Why not? And not a lot of conversations were going on. And purely accidentally, one year, Christmas was on Sunday. And I said to my good friend Dick, let's try it. Let's just try it. See what happens if anybody shows up on Sunday afternoon. And guys did show up. They said how great it was to have a place to go other than their goddamn biological families where they couldn't be queer. They could come out and hang out with a bunch of gay men. And all of a sudden, because it was Sunday afternoon instead of Saturday night, it didn't turn into drug, sex, and rock and roll. It was a conversation. A guys just hanging out together. And so we thought, oh, that's it. We're supposed to have these on Sunday afternoon. So we continued having them for a few times. And then we met these two wonderful lesbians in Sedgwick that had a brother living with HIV, and they wanted to do something. So a day-long conference was put on in Ellsworth, sort of as an educational event. And after that, we thought it went so well, we need to start an organization of some sort. I got to get that. Hi, what's up? This is the only number I have. 10 o'clock tomorrow, right? I do. Yep, you're in the back of the building, I was told. Number three. Number three. Thank you. Bye-bye. I like her, she called me honey. I'm seeing a nutritionist, and I'll tell you why sometime when I'm brave enough to talk about the hard stuff. Go on.
Oh, yeah.
So we started an organization called Downeast AIDS Network, and did the best job we could. Some education. As soon as we put the word out there, there were places like hospitals and schools and whatever that wanted to know about HIV and that sort of stuff. And I also, at that point, the agency that had the case management contract was in Bangor, and one of the guys that worked there called me and he asked me if I would be a buddy to somebody living with HIV. And it was the first time I had met someone. And it was the same story. I learned so many times. I heard this story of gay men, as soon as they got out of high school, getting on the bus and getting the fuck out of rural Maine, because they knew their life was not going to be good here. And then many of them coming back sick. My first two buddies were that way. And then we started the organization, and I realized we needed to do some more than that. I had gone to a wonderful retreat in southern Maine in June of 1990, and I wanted to bring that concept back here. And so over the next 10 years, I helped start 4 different retreats, some for gay men, some for positive folks. And sometimes it was really easy finding the money to do that, and sometimes it was hard. When you get contracts from the feds and the state, they always want those, there's a word, deliverables. They don't understand the concept of bringing together a group of people, often disenfranchised people who are in a private space where they can be themselves. And I've come to understand that that's called health. That's called good health. Anyway, that was a big deal. It was a big deal. I used to say that the state paid me to do HIV education in the gay male community, and I came to realize after reading Obama's first the word community organizing. Oh, that's what I'm doing. Fuck this HIV education stuff. That we did that. That was part of what we did. Of course, that was what we did. But bringing together, I mean, there's so many gay men I met during those 25, 30 years that I did that work, had been out there having sex with guys forever, never talking to one though, never having a conversation. Being raised in the 40s and 50s in rural Michigan, I had no idea what I was going to be an adult. I knew I was not going to be married to a woman, but I certainly didn't know what else that was. So the concept that there's this thing called a community of people that care for each other and do other than have sex with each other, take care of each other. That concept is a big deal, and getting people to understand that about themselves. So I did that for a bunch of years. And then I was director of Downeast AIDS Network for 10 years, which was a big deal. I've never seen myself as a manager. I'm not real good at managing people. But I was lucky to have a bunch of people working with me. I was a case manager. That was how I first, after doing the gay men stuff, I also became the case manager. And I've often said that I was really glad I didn't, after talking to other social workers who had gone to school to become a social worker, I realized how I was glad I didn't do that. I was doing what my mother taught me to do. I cry a lot. I'm a crier. I've been crying since I was a kid. Oh God, when I was a kid, I cried all the time. Anyway, Um, I was lucky enough along the way to have a really good colleague, Latona Torrey, who was one of those educated people. But we spent a whole lot of time acting as each other's clinical supervisors and learning from each other. She was great. She eventually worked for me later. Later, after I left Downeast AIDS Network Regional Medical Center of Lubec, hired me to go after federal money. That there was federal money out there for HIV care and prevention that hadn't been coming to northern Maine. So it gave me a chance to try to get some of that money and start another organization. And for the first hunk of money we got was called Ryan White Part C money, which goes to hospitals to have clinics. And it was clear to me here in northern Maine, the 5 counties of northern Maine equal the area of Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island combined. There was no place for a clinic. So I tried to put together this program where we had 12 different organizations communicating with each other and required to communicate each other through contract. And it worked great sometimes. It took a lot of cheerleading to keep it all going, and probably still does. Continued working for them. Remember the first time the CDC all of a sudden had the concept, oh, people aren't coming into a clinic, gay men in particular are not coming into a clinic to get tested. Why is that? Ah, ah, ah. Because they got to go to a place where everyone says, that's where you go get your HIV test. So we started doing a lot of outreach, and that was great work, getting out there and finding men where they were, doing testing in your car in the back behind Hannaford, wherever you needed to meet these guys, and not just guys, people that use needles. Certainly, that was a big deal when trying to integrate those two things, those two communities, and it still is, I believe, probably a process. They were all getting sick of the same fucking thing. That was not a big secret. But tried to work with those two groups together. I remember having some heterosexual men coming to me and said, "Well, we need a special program just for us." And I said, "Okay, well, what's that going to look like?" Trying to trying to trying to meet people's needs where they're at. I guess the other big thing that I'll piss and moan about is working with federal and state contractors. Most of my, doing that for 25 years or plus, I had a bunch of them, And I think I can remember two that actually worked on the ground at one point in their life. We're talking about rural fucking Maine. What does somebody lives in Washington, D.C., and trying to manage this contract and tell me how to manage my program? So I did a whole lot of dancing around to make things work. At least I think I did. I mean, I know I did the dancing, the work part. I'm not sure. I think sometimes I think it worked. So that's what I've been doing here for a while. It certainly changed my life. I remember the two things that poor little country boy from rural Michigan, growing up and thinking, well, what am I going to do with my life? I had no concept, no idea. Certainly, I knew I was attracted to textiles, but never occurred to me that I would make them, that I could make a piece of textiles. But the two things I knew I wasn't going to do, a social worker and a teacher. And of course, I ended up being a college professor for 10 years and then a goddamn social worker for a whole lot of years. when we talk about growing up in Michigan in the 40s and 50s, yeah, I don't know how conscious I was of what it was all about. I know it was what it was all about. I know that my two big secrets were that I had sex with guys and I didn't believe in Jesus, and those were two big secrets that I couldn't talk to anybody about. And so I think there was probably a whole lot of trauma of that, growing up with those two big secrets that I knew were who I was. I mean, I had no concept of being a gay man. I knew that I had sex with guys, but I didn't know what that meant when I was an adult. I had no picture. There was no movies, there was no TV. We didn't have TV, but even if there was TV, there weren't certainly any gay men. And probably the only images I might have had were, sort of big old sissies or whatever. And some of my best friends were big old sissies. I think I was always probably pretty protected from a lot of that because I was a big guy. And I played football. I did those things that I was supposed to do. And I think that someone asked me a while back, what would you tell a 14-year-old Ron King? And I think it was that you have choices. I had never occurred to me that I had a choice. I did exactly what was expected of me. I wanted to be a good little boy. I was okay in sports, but school, I'm dyslexic and I didn't learn how to read until late high school. I literally did not know how to read all those years in school. I don't know why they passed me, but they did. There were times that it was very clear I was just to shut up and sit in the corner and sweep the floor, take care of other kids. I was always the one that was taking care of the sick kids. I've said often that not knowing how to lead and read and not doing well in school, 4-H saved my life because as long as I had a nice cow and a nice garden, I could achieve. I could achieve, and I could get awards for having those good things. And they were nice kids in 4-H too. There wasn't the kind of sort of sort of what you run into in other sort of any culture. You've got the good kids and the bad kids and the bullies. And I don't remember any incident in 4-H that had to do with discrimination or bullies. And I remember there's one time in 4-H that always moved me a lot. A young woman who was a year older than I was in the school I went to in high school. She was a junior when I was a sophomore and got pregnant and had to drop out of school. And of course, everyone, just treated that like it was the end of the world. But when it came to 4-H, they didn't treat her any different. She got to do whatever all the rest of us kids did, where in school, they made her sit in the fucking library rather than go to study hall. I mean, what kind of horrible things would she do to us going to study hall, for Christ's sakes? But she had to go to the library. She couldn't go to study hall. As queer kids, we carry around these secrets. And all of those institutions that are out there to protect us, the church, the school, the family, all three of them, we can't tell those secrets to. And those are the people that are supposed to be protecting us. That was pretty powerful hearing that. Yeah, that's the way it is. I've always believed that us queers, it took me a long time. Earlier I talked about the coming out process for myself and watching myself learn and whatever the word is along the way. I started having sex as soon as I could get a hard on, so I knew that piece. I didn't know what it meant to be in community with other gay men. I could so clearly in college, undergraduate, walking into a gay bar and we hung out together. And I also was very interested, did dance a lot. And so, of course, it was a bunch of gay men. And we were, all of a sudden, were a group of gay men that hung out together and didn't, so that process. And then did a whole lot of reading when I first started doing this work. There was a wonderful guy called Paul Monette who wrote two memoirs in the late 80s of taking care of a lover who was dying of HIV, and they sort of became our textbooks on how to do that. And then there was a couple books. All of a sudden, there were these books in the 90s sort of looking at gay men as our spiritual side. Who are we? Why are we here? And for me, coming to understand that, number one, I am of a different gender than heterosexual men. That's the only word you can use to describe the difference between me and a heterosexual man is gender. We don't have words for that. Other cultures on this planet, before all of us Christians came along and told them not to do what they've been doing, had words to describe gender, had words to describe lots of different ways we can be who we are. And so that's one thing. The other thing is coming to understand that as a gay man, I first off, coming to understand I am so grateful I turned out to be a gay man because I am who I am because of being a gay man. And that we have certain traits, certain abilities, certain skills. I think I think one of my favorites, two favorite ones of that is we're the Make Beautiful tribe. We were clearly the population put on this planet to make the place beautiful. I've loved this great phrase. If we didn't have gay men making the place beautiful, all we'd have is Martha fucking Stewart. And where would we be then? So, so we're here to make the place beautiful, and we're also the people that live in between. That's why we're great counselors and great ministers, because we are, and I don't mean the in between male and female. I mean in between. We could say in between male and female, but in between, we're the in between people. In Africa, many of the in many of the tribes, gay men are the ones that are known to keep the gate open between this world and the next. That's their job, to keep the gate open. So that was a big deal for me coming to understand. Oh, I was placed here because of my whatever. That was a big piece of coming out, I think. That was when I came to celebrate that I turned out to be so glad I turned out to be queer. So glad. Even given all the shit, all the goddamn fucking shit that's still going on. Yeah, Charlie Howard. It was when I was teaching at the university. It was way back when, in the '70s, and he was young gay man was thrown off a bridge in Bangor, and he drowned. He died, and it really turned into this major event that really stimulated the queer community to do something, to react, to get pissed, to do stuff. And I think it was sort of the spark that started a whole lot of stuff. There, this big organization in Bangor started up called Bagels of all things, Bangor Area Gay Straight something something something. And they did a lot, and for years afterwards, the sort of there was no queer marches in Bangor or parades or whatever, but once a year we would have a memorial for Charlie Howard, and probably for the next 10, 15 years that was the event, the public event where queers came out on the street. But it really did start up a lot of stuff. The state, about that same time, was the first time I went to a state Democratic convention, and it was the first time I think probably there was a queer caucus, and a few people got agitated and started doing stuff, and eventually an organization was created, and then we're talking about moving into the middle of the 80s, and that organization started working on HIV stuff. And so it really did stimulate the process of being more public, um, and then more public, demanding civil rights, marriage equality, all of that stuff came from that. I really believe came from that original impetus to move forward and to do something. Yeah, that's that's Charlie Howard, and we're still doing it. I mean, recently was what was it, the 40th anniversary, I think, that we went to uh, some time ago. After Charlie Howard was murdered, and we tried to do some stuff, and we invited some legislators to hang out with us in somebody's living room, and I remember that felt big. That bill felt big, and then the MLGPA, the Maine Lesbian Gay Political Alliance, was wonderful in putting that all together. But the number of times we went to the legislature and had to listen to those guys debate whether I was just like them and that I deserved the same rights as them, over and fucking over again, and letting the people of Maine 3 times vote on that. And the same way with queer marriage, we had to have 3 different times we had to vote on that. And one time we had a Republican governor who's still alive, I think, for a while, and may have been one of the first times the legislature actually passed the civil rights things, and that motherfucker vetoed it. And my partner at the time wrote this wonderful letter to him and just said, for every kid that kills themselves because they're queer, I blame you. For every, and went down this list of like 5 times. And the guy actually, fucking governor actually responded to him. I thought ever. And I remember getting a letter from my local legislature at the time when I was trying to encourage him to vote for civil rights for queers. And he wrote me back and said, I hope you, what's the words he used? Whatever. Honor me. That's not the words he used, but he honor me the same way I honor you. And I said, no, I don't honor you because you don't believe I'm equal to you. I didn't hear back from him, but that concept of and then all the right wing throwing out, you don't deserve special rights. Well, having civil rights is not special rights, and having laws saying you can't fire me because I'm queer is not really special rights. So that was a lot of work, but I'm glad we did it, and I really applaud the community. I mean, it happened all over the country, but Maine was right there at the beginning, I think, on a lot of that stuff. We were certainly the first state to pass marriage equality by law, by the people. Certainly, we were the first to do that. So that was part of what we did. Yeah. When I came to Maine to teach at Haystack, just down the road, and smoked too much dope. And this guy, another hippie I met, said, "Gee, why don't you buy a farm?" And I thought, oh, never intended to leave New York. I had a great job. My job I was going to be there for the rest of my life. And, once again, purely spur of the moment. Oh, yeah, I am going to do that. It took me a while to figure out being here, what this was all about. And again, it was about producing, taking care of yourself, being in charge of yourself. And who is it? Um, and realized that, when I lived in New York, I went to the Essex market and would buy a half a bushel of peaches and go back and make jelly and can it. And I thought, oh, that's what I was doing even in New York, was making your own food, taking care of your own stuff, I think was important to me. And then a few years later, my brother moved here from Toronto, and we worked hard to make it a real producing farm with a lot of sheep, and certainly it turned into really the money, uh, especially later, was vegetables, and still is off of vegetables. I was lucky enough in 2009, 10, in there someplace, that my brother and I talked about who's going to take over, And I knew it was going to be difficult because my brother's the epitome of a white heterosexual control queen. And if it didn't work, if they weren't the right people, it wasn't going to work. And it was pure accident. He had a stroke and didn't get a choice. He didn't get a vote. And they ended up, my sister-in-law and he sold them their half of the farm. And this amazing young couple, Amanda and Paul, who are still there working really hard, I gave them my half. If the deal was they take care of me the rest of my life, whatever that may mean. And it has been, I feel blessed. I feel totally blessed that there was, again, a pure accident. All the big deals in my life have been accidents, I think.